Greetings, book lovers, and welcome to Author-ized. Today's guest is originally from North Carolina, but she is a Jersey girl now. Her debut novel for middle grade readers, Counting Time, published in April 2016, has received some pretty great reviews. And so without further ado, let's welcome Melanie Conklin to Author-ized. Welcome, Melanie.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Before we get to talking about your novel, Counting Time, I wanted to talk about your previous career. I read that you were a product designer for about 10 years. So I want to know, what does a product designer do, and what kinds of products did you play a part in designing?
That's a great question. It's a question that I answer a lot for kids when I Skype with them. A product designer is a job that not many people are familiar with, but if you've ever been in a store like Target and you've purchased something that was on the shelves, a product designer is the person who figured out what that product should look like and how it would be made. I worked in conjunction with marketing people and engineers in order to get the products made. But my job was to envision what it would look like, what kind of materials, how it might work. Some of the products that I worked on are a lot of baking products. I worked with Wilton on quite a few things, including their giant cupcake pan, which you may have seen for birthday parties. It's a really big cupcake. I'm the one who designed that pan. I also worked on Sharpies, like the Click Sharpie pen. I've worked on a variety of school supplies and all the way to medical equipment. So with product design, it can really span a lot of topics, just like with writing.
What was your college major?
My college major was industrial design, and I studied at North Carolina State's School of Design, which is heralded for their industrial design program. And there we learned that mix of art and engineering together, which is how you create the things that people buy on the shelves.
So do you do fine art? Do you paint? Do you draw? Do you
I do.
doodle?
I continue to draw. I doodle. After spending so many years drawing, drawing is still a part of my life. Right now I'm working on concepts for picture books, and hopefully that is something I'll be able to do in the future.
It's so interesting. The last couple of authors that I've interviewed are young moms, and they've written adult novels, but they're sort of seeing the potential for children's novels. And it was interesting, one of them, Wendy Lee, said she never realized the poetry and the rhythm of children's picture books, you know, saying a lot with few words. And well, that would be really great. I look forward to seeing if so you would write and illustrate.
That's the plan, hopefully. We'll see how that pans out in the next year or two.
So tell us a little bit about how you think your college major and your career in industrial design informed your career as a writer, as a novelist.
I think that's another great question. For me, it always comes back to problem solving. In many disciplines, but especially in creative ones like product design, you're trying to solve this problem. You're trying to come up with a solution that will be the right price, the right longevity, the right functionality for a user. So for me in writing books, I would say that design really set me up well for the criticism that you receive when you're writing, especially working with an agent or an editor. You're receiving criticism that's functional. It has the goal of making the work better. As a designer, there's a lot of criticism. We're happy if we end up with one idea out of 1,000 on the shelf.
Wow.
Whereas with writing, I feel like I get to keep a lot of my ideas. So I'm pretty flexible. I'm quick to change things or make big changes. And I think that that's why. I think because product design taught me how to solve problems creatively and just really be focused on the end goal. Instead of worrying about how many words you're throwing away, just be focused on getting to the right words. And I think that's been a very helpful mindset to have.
Wow, that's a great answer.
Yeah.
That's good advice for any writer. Tell us a little bit about Time, your main character, and why middle grades? How did you end up with a middle grade novel?
Like a lot of authors that I've spoken with, my path wasn't a straight one. I was a product designer for over a decade, and then we moved to New Jersey and bought a home. And we decided that I'd like to stay home with my kids while they were little. And so we bought a small house that we could afford, and I stayed home with my kids. Product design's kind of all or nothing. Either you're working 60 hours a week or you're not working at all. So I decided, well, maybe that's the end of that path for now. And I spent the next year painting every room in my house and getting everything the way that I wanted it. And then when I ran out of things to do, I had all this creative energy and I needed to put it somewhere. I'd always been a big reader my whole life. Books were always my favorite thing. And I always had books with me. And so one day I literally woke up with the idea for a book. And I thought to myself, I could write that while the baby is napping. And I started doing it. And about a week later, I told my husband, I think I'm writing a book. And he said, of course you are. And so I wrote that book. It was terrible. Like most first books, it was a training wheels kind of book. So, but I got interested in publishing and what are these different genres. And that's when I learned about middle grade. A part of me was drawn to stories that are set at that age, like A Wrinkle in Time or Charlotte's Web. Those kind of books always really spoke to me because at that age, 10, 11, you're opening up to the world, but you're not a grown-up yet. And so you've still got that innocence and curiosity of a child while you're dealing with really big world things. So that's what led me into middle grade. And I read a lot of books. I said, I need to figure out what's happening in the market right now because it had been a while. I mean, I was reading recreationally. Now I was looking at it as a job. So I read a lot of books, figured out where that niche was that I wanted to be in. When I had read Wonder by R.J. Palacio, which many people have read, it's a really wonderful story. I had an idea cross my mind, a what if, which is, where all good ideas come from. And I thought, what if you were not the child who was facing a difficult situation? What if you were the brother or sister of that child? And for me, there was something just yearning to be told there, the story of a child whose life is affected by what's going on with their sibling, yet they don't have the freedom to make the changes that they want in their own life. And that's how I came up with Time Story. That's when I started thinking about her and what it would be like to be the sister of Val, who has neuroblastoma, a type of cancer that affects young children. And that's where I started. It was many drafts later, and a couple of years later when it sold to actually become a book. But that was actually the third manuscript that I had started, and I had a feeling that one might go somewhere when I started writing it.
I want to read a couple of excerpts from some reviews. The Horn book says, growing pains, a family in crisis, and one child's immense fear of loss are compassionately and honestly depicted in Conklin's debut novel. And from Kirkus Reviews, Time's remarkable perseverance and resilience will inspire readers of Conklin's compassionate tale. As you were writing it, did you set out to inspire your readers?
I think for me, my connection to neuroblastoma came about actually many years before I started writing. I lived in Brooklyn, and there was a child in our neighborhood who was diagnosed and with stage 4 neuroblastoma, and I started following his mother's blog. Blogging was kind of a new thing at that time, and I just really felt compelled to know what was going on with their family and to support them when they needed help from the community. And that's when I came to understand how this particular illness works and who it affects. And so when I went to write Time Story, I think I really just wanted more than anything to do justice by the families who go through this in real life. I felt a very strong desire to be accurate and to be respectful of what they go through because it is such a difficult thing. So that for me, I think that's where that the compassion, the sense of compassion comes across. Is Time is a compassionate character, but also that's me wanting to very much honor the families who go through this in real life.
Did you do a lot of research? Did you talk to doctors? What did you do?
I did a lot of research. What was interesting is that I first learned about neuroblastoma about 8 years ago, and I didn't start writing until less than 5 years ago. So for a few years there, I was involved with fundraising for pediatric cancer research and was friends with several families going through this. And I really just paid attention to it just because it touched my heart. So then when I started writing the book and I realized that's what I would want to portray, I went and did more thorough research. Memorial Sloan Kettering, which is the hospital featured in the book, is a real hospital where these treatments really happen. And they have a lot of incredible information online. Because neuroblastoma is a fairly rare cancer, there's actually a tremendous amount of community and information sharing online because parents are trying to work with each other to come up with new solutions, and they're geographically spread out. So I was very fortunate that there's a lot of information and personal insight available on the internet, and also people are really willing to talk about this. So I did some interviews with families and a doctor, and they were all very excited that I was working on a book with this subject matter.
Oh, I bet they were. Lots of the authors that we talk to write about family, and your book is all about family, a family with a really terrible, terrible crisis. It's like the worst thing that a lot of people could imagine, a terrible illness for a little kid, somebody's son, somebody's brother. There's the quote from Tolstoy, which I used last time we interviewed. Last month's interview was with Jade Chang. And the quote, I'm paraphrasing, from Tolstoy is, all happy families are alike, but all unhappy families are different. I think that's the quote. Is Time's family unhappy?
You know, I think that's definitely something that they are struggling with in the story. I feel like, isn't that just the question that we're all always asking ourselves? You know, am I happy? How can I be more happy? What is it to even be happy? And I think that when you're at that middle grade age and you're in middle school and you're starting to have more autonomy over your life, those questions start to rise up. You become more proactive about who are you friends with, or what kind of subjects do you want to spend time on. And so for me, I think that all of those questions of trying to figure out where you belong and what your connections are at that age reflects in the family as well, because they're in such a changing and difficult situation that they're constantly trying to find what their normal is for that moment as well. So that's Time's specific journey. She's trying to get back to normal, but that's also her family's journey. And so I think that's why we see it reflected in all of the characters. I think they have moments of unhappiness, and that's okay. I think that you go through those moments of unhappiness, and then you realize that there can be happiness again after that. So that's a tough thing that they're facing, but I think also the hope that they have for the future.
Who are some of the authors who have inspired you?
Well, you might notice from Time being set in New York City. I'm a big fan of Rebecca Stead, whose novels are set in New York City. I've read When You Reach Me about a dozen times. It's one of my favorite books of all time. And so I'm always very excited when she has a new novel coming out. I also really love Linda Mullally Hunt's books, Fish in a Tree and One for the Murphys. She also writes families that are dealing with big stuff. And she writes families in a way that feels so specific and real. And so I really admire that about her writing. And there are a lot of other middle grade authors that I read widely. And so, I love books from Lisa Graff and so many other authors. But really, my biggest influence has got to be Rebecca Stead, just because there's something about the way she portrays New York that I aspired to try to do when I was writing this.
Did you, when you finished the novel, let our viewers hear a little bit about the journey of the novel when you were finished with it? Did you already have an agent? What did you do with the book?
Well, it had an interesting start. I had queried, I'd written 2 stories that weren't ready. They just, were learning books. And then when I was writing Time Story, I felt like this could turn into something. I feel like this is at the level now where maybe I could get an agent with this manuscript. I had critique partners at the time, so we would share our work and critique each other's work, which is a great source of information to take your work to the next level. And I shared a draft, the very first draft of Counting Time, which I wrote in about 6 weeks. I shared with my friends, and they were reading it over Christmas break. And there was this online Twitter pitch party where basically people can pitch like a line about their book, and if agents like it, they can communicate with you there and say, I'd like to read that. And a couple of my friends decided to tweet about my book that they had just read because they were excited about it. And I ended up having several agents get in touch with me, and it wasn't ready yet. So I spent a couple of days revising as quickly as I could. And then I got back to those agents as well as querying the ones that I had been interested in. And luckily, my agent, Pete, was very quick. He was back in touch with me rapidly. And I'll always remember when, because he sent me the email during the middle of the Super Bowl on Super Bowl Sunday. And so that was memorable. And we talked the next day, and it was a little bit of a process, but I could tell from early on that we would work well together. So Time was my book that brought me to that next step of having an agent.
And then what does the agent do?
And then from there, I had written a couple versions of the book, and then Pete and I discussed it, and he wrote up an edit letter, just like an editor would do. He's a very hands-on agent and gave me a lot more feedback to work off of. So that led to a couple more rounds of revising the book. And once we then felt like it was ready to go out to editors' eyes, that's when Pete takes over, because he's the one with the contacts. And so he got early reads, and we got some more feedback. So we did another revision. And so it was a process. What I learned is that writing is rewriting, and that you should never expect to get something right the first time. The goal is to just write something that you can then change into the right thing. It's really like building a sandcastle. You know, you got to put that lump there, and then you can carve away at it and get it to look more like a castle. And so that was the process that I experienced with Pete, that then led to my editor, Stacey Barney, purchasing the book.
Did you do a dance of joy? How did you find out it got bought?
Well, it was that was also an exciting process. Pete, again, called me at a memorable time. I was in the middle of a book fair for my youngest child. I was at a book fair buying books when he called me and told me we had an offer on Counting Time, which was super exciting. And I got to explain it to the people around me. And then there were several editors who were interested. And so the book I ended up having conversations with different editors about what they would envision for the story, which was really wonderful to be able to hear those insights from these sharp people that know so much about books. And then there ended up being an auction, which is when several houses are interested in buying the book. And it literally is like an auction, like what you would imagine, but your agent handles it. So I had to go to the grocery store and do laundry and do normal things all day while I knew that people were bidding on whether or not they would buy my book. And so when Pete called me, when we had good news about where we ended up, I was very excited. I was lucky because my friend that I carpool with was just bringing my kids home from school. And so I got to hug it out with her, because that's kind of an incredible moment when you find out that your words are really going to be in print.
Yeah, and not just that. You got an agent, you got an editor, you got different publishing houses bidding over your first book.
Yeah, it was
Really?
crazy.
Congrats, that's
really
amazing.
There's really no way to know how to process that. You just kind of go from one step to the next, and that's what your agent is for. Your agent is your guide when these things happen, because you don't know. You don't know what it's like until it happens to you.
Wow, congrats.
Thanks.
That's great. So do you have a fictional character that's your favorite ever? From when you were a kid, from now?
You know what's interesting is I do. Most people are familiar with the book Vanity Fair. And Becky Sharp, who's the main character in that book, I loved. I probably read that book the first time in third or fourth grade.
Wow.
I was a little ahead of the curve with reading, but what's interesting is you only understand certain parts when you're a kid.
Sure.
So I've read it many times as an adult now, and I just love that Becky's character is real and true to herself and doesn't conform to what other readers might expect, and or what the people of her time period expect. And she has agency. She makes things happen. And while people debate whether she's a heroine or a villain, I really liked that autonomy, that idea that every person can make their own choices in their own life. And so that's something I'm always very interested in with my characters is what are the choices they're making? What are they actively doing to try to change their situation? And so Becky Sharp, and she's very quotable too. She has very, very good witty retorts. And I love that kind of dialogue. So that's something I aspire to as well.
Is there anything else you want to tell your readers and our viewers about time and counting time and
Yeah.
your...
One thing that comes up and that I see discussed a lot in both the publishing world and in the educator world is that some books, based on the blurb, like for this book, that time moves across the country for her little brother's cancer treatment, and people hear that short description, and a lot of times books get categorized if that's a girl book or a boy book or a funny book or a sad book. And I see that happen a lot, especially with recommendations. And for me, I think it's really important when I write. I like to show all of those parts. The story should be alternately funny and sad and harrowing. It should have all those different kinds of notes. And so while Counting Time may be a book that has this crisis at its center, it's also just as much about time acclimating to middle school and friends and first crushes. And those parts of the story matter just as much to me because I think that, especially when you're a kid, the small things in life do matter just as much as the big things. So that is something that I like to share because I know sometimes people are leery of a book that they think will be sad. And I hear that a lot about some of my favorite books that I read as a reader. I always say give it a shot. You never know, because with sadness, usually hope comes hand in hand. And so I think that you might leave with a different feeling than you're expecting to.
So nobody should be afraid to read Counting Time because they think it's going to be too sad for them.
Yeah. I know that a family, even when you're in the middle of the worst crisis you've ever had, you're also going to laugh. There are also going to be jokes. There are going to be those light moments. And I think that that's what makes Time's family come to life, is that we see all of those different moments with them, the struggle, but also the joy, because that is what we're living for, right? And so I'm trying to capture that in my books.
Sure. So now, Melanie, we do something that I'm going to ask you to do something we do at the end of every edition of Author-ized, and that is to grab your book, open to any page, and read a passage, and then talk about that passage.
Any page. And the whole page or a paragraph?
Whatever sort of works so that you've got a neat little passage that you could talk about and give our readers a little taste.
Okay. Chapter 8, Ravioli. I'm reading at the beginning of Chapter 8. On Monday morning, it was time for Val to go to the hospital, which meant we were back on his schedule again. That included getting up extra early, staying out of Mom's way, and trying not to do anything that would make them late for their appointment. For Mom, being late was the worst sin a person could ever commit. Ever. Time, are you in there? Dad called from outside the bathroom door. I spit into the sink and garbled, uh-huh. Okay, well, wrap it up. We have to leave for the hospital in a few minutes. Okay. I swished and spit again before dropping my toothbrush into my cup. As I walked down the hall to the kitchen, I pulled my hair back and tied it with one of Corey's new hair bands, a tiny green one with white stripes, a gift from one of her new drama club friends. She'd braided her long, wavy hair into a million skinny braids before she went to bed. Her hair looked cool, but not like Corey. So even in this passage, you can see that at every moment, whether it's brushing her teeth, getting her hair ready for school, there is an impact in Time's life of the larger picture of what is happening with her family. That even brushing her teeth isn't something that you're just goofing off. It needs to be done promptly. It needs to be done in a time frame so that they can get to the hospital on time. So I think you'll find that urgency pretty much on any page that you turn to. There's a sense of forward momentum because Val's treatment is happening, and we have to keep up with it.
Thank you. Is there anything that you're working on now that you could share with us?
I am working on my second middle grade novel with my editor. The subject matter of that book is ADHD, and I have a boy narrator, and it's also very, very funny. He's a very funny character. So that's what I'm working on right now, and that will be out in 2018.
Congrats. So you can learn more about Melanie Conklin by visiting her website at melanieconklin.com. Thank you, Melanie, for joining us today on Author-ized, and thank all of you for watching. Check back soon for more inspiring authors talking about their inspiring books.